Breakers have been crashing into France's Atlantic coast for thousands of years. The spray and swell take us back to the primeval oceans that covered the Earth at the dawn of time before life came into being. A world of earth, rock, and water, swept by raging winds. It was in the water that life first stirred, long before animals crawled out of the primeval soup and learned to live on land. Cliffs are a liminal habitat, halfway between land and sea. Perhaps they can provide clues to our beginnings. Maybe we can piece together the story of evolution from what we find here among the rocks and the waves. France's Atlantic coastline is a haven for flora and fauna. These cliffs represent one of Europe's distinctive natural ecosystems. This granite rock face is an ideal habitat for seabirds. The shag is the first to nest there as soon as winter is over. Its head is startlingly reptilian. That is hardly surprising. Birds were the next evolutionary stage after dinosaurs. The male performs his courtship display in March, serenading his mate at frequencies that are barely audible to the human ear. But the female cormorant gets the message. The machine-like movements of the bird's courtship displays may look ridiculous to us, but they make up secret codes. Each species has evolved a specific sequence of movements to make sure that they only mate with their own kind. In exploring the marine world, we are also exploring our own beginnings. For millions of years, this is what life on Earth looked like. Jellyfish just like these swarmed the oceans more than 600 million years ago. Their anatomy is very simple. They have no brain and are 98% water. They consist of a gelatinous body fringed with tentacles, with a central digestive orifice used for both feeding and excretion. Like most living species, jellyfish are either male or female and reproduce sexually. Jellyfish larvae are initially free-floating, but soon attach themselves to a submerged section of the cliff, where an amazing event ensues. Originally a single entity, the jellyfish larva now divides to become several discrete organisms. One by one, the newborn jellyfish separate off from the original larva and become autonomous individuals. They float free and soon are indistinguishable from the rest of the plankton. Plankton is made up of very basic organisms, much like the first life forms that inhabited the primeval oceans. To this day, almost all marine animals are plankton in the first stage of their existence. They begin their lives as life itself began. Some of the plankton will become oysters, lobsters, and starfish. For the moment, they are mere floating specks that look nothing like their future adult selves. One of the larvae has outgrown its plankton phase and is metamorphosed into a different being. No one has ever come up with a satisfactory explanation of why crabs walk sideways. It's one of the countless mysteries of the sea. The crab's mouth is as good as a Swiss Army knife. What with its long antenna, short antenna, 2 sets of maxillae, mandibles, lamellae, pincers, palps, malixipeds, and other complex mouthparts, it has a built-in set of cutlery. Despite being armor-plated, the green crab has no real means of protection against large predators. The rock pools at the bottom of the cliffs are like so many seafood platters for our most familiar seabird. Herring gulls are lawless ruffians, and they've never heard of honor among thieves. A mate's lunch is fair game. It is spring. The sheer slopes are teeming with breeding pairs of birds. In the gull colony, each bird has to find a partner and a nesting site, and defend its territory against the neighbors. The parents-to-be are collecting nesting materials, or some of them are anyway. The ones tearing the grass are more likely to be males trying to intimidate one another. Some gulls are already sitting on their nests, while others have only got as far as mating or courtship displays. Some mistake, surely. It turns out the lady was already spoken for. In the spring, there are seabirds all the way up the cliff. The territory is parceled out like a city, with desirable neighborhoods and outlying suburbs. Each neighborhood has its own community, but all of them have sea views. It's a tight fit for the youngsters. Gulls live in dormitories, but fulmars prefer private apartments. With a balcony, of course. A few floors down, several families of guillemots share their accommodation. Guillemots are related to penguins and are more comfortable in water than on land, where they huddle awkwardly, clinging to the cliffs. Like other seabirds, they only come onto dry land to breed. Kittiwakes nest on inaccessible cliff-top ledges, with a dizzying view of the rocks below. Puffins live on the top floor, nesting in burrows. Their dramatic eye makeup and big, brightly colored beaks give them an endearing, clownish appearance. The gannets have a secret hideaway a few furlongs off the shore. They need an island all to themselves. Several thousand pairs of gannets congregate to nest. It's not everyone's idea of a quiet getaway. They often communicate via ritualized movements. During courtship displays, two birds will knock their beaks together as if in greeting. Gannets are creatures of habit and return to nest in the same place year after year. Gannets are Europe's biggest seabirds, with a wingspan of up to 6 feet. They get all their food from the ocean, diving head first at over 100 kilometers per hour to catch fish. For fish, there is safety in numbers. Their strategy against predators is to form dense shoals that make it harder to pick out individuals. In the course of evolution, marine animals developed into startlingly different shapes. A host of prehistoric-looking creatures inhabit the waters next to the rock face. There were cuttlefish in the oceans long before fish came into being. They are mollusks like snails, but with much more sophisticated brains. They can change color to blend in with their surroundings, or to match their moods. The snake pipefish is related to seahorses. In fact, it could be a seahorse that has uncurled. In a crevice in the cliff lurks a large crustacean. We all know what a lobster looks like, but there is much more to it than meets the eye. Lobsters communicate with each other by sending out scent messages from orifices underneath their eyes. They use their antenna like a blind person's cane to sense the presence of intruders and find out who or what they are before they get close. These two males aren't exchanging a friendly handshake. They're quarreling over territory. The cliff is divided into stories underwater as well as above the surface. The creatures that inhabit the lowest levels have evolved special features to cope with life in the depths. The fish that live on the seabed are less streamlined than those that swim long distances. The gurnard's flat belly is typical of bottom feeders. Some have adapted so well to the seabed that they blend in with it. The anglerfish or monkfish camouflages itself with sand and seaweed. Completely indistinguishable from the sea floor, it waves a tiny piece of bait at the end of a filament, just like an angler casting a line, hence its name. But a gray seal would swallow the anglerfish whole, fishing line and all. Gray seals reign supreme at the top of the food chain. Although they are mammals, they can stay underwater for nearly an hour. They even sleep underwater, only surfacing to breathe from time to time. Gray seals can be found in the Atlantic waters south of the English Channel. They are superb swimmers. They seem to revel in blowing bubbles, performing underwater acrobatics, playing hide and seek, and chasing each other. On land, they look clumsy. They only come out of the water to rest or to breed. shines down on all these marine beings. It governs the movements of the tides, dragging the water this way and that, as if it were pulling on invisible strings from its position in the night sky. The ebb and flow of the tides have encouraged aquatic plants and animals to adjust to life on land. The small rock pools left where the tide goes out contain a fantastic concentration of marine marvels that encapsulate the story of life. The creatures that inhabit the section of the cliffs that is under the water half the time have to be unusually tough. They need to be able to withstand extreme conditions, being battered by huge waves, totally immersed at high tide, and dried out by the sun at low tide. Mussels breathe and feed by filtering water, deriving their nourishment from tiny particles of organic matter they extract from it. At low tide, they close their shells, trapping water inside to keep themselves from drying out. Crabs sometimes venture out onto the rocks in search of food, but there are much richer pickings to be had in rock pools. The crab's high-tech tool set makes short work of the mussel's armor. By breaking into the mussel, the crab has inconvenienced one of its own relatives. But let's not get crabby about it. The crab's diminutive cousin is the size and shape of a pea. It was living inside the mussel. Now it's out in the cold, not knowing which way to turn. Pea crabs are parasites of mussels. Their soft bodies make them vulnerable, and they depend on their hosts for food. This one needs to find another host as soon as it can. Ah, that will do nicely. No sense dithering. It moves in right away. Pea crabs tap into their host's food supply. They feed on the particles that come their way when their hosts draw in water. The rest of the time, they are content in their own little world. Many more creatures' evolution has been determined by the ebb and flow of the tides. Limpets cling to the rocks like, well, limpets. Each limpet's shell is made to measure, tailored exactly to the contours of its particular piece of rock. It could not live anywhere else. At every low tide, it goes back to its private parking space. Once it's covered by seawater, it revives and starts grazing on seaweed. Near the limpet are some odd-looking creatures that seem to be getting very excited about something. Barnacles are not mollusks like the limpets, but highly unusual crustaceans. They breathe and eat by waving their feathery legs in the water. They belong to the same family as crabs. Sessile barnacles, like these, attach themselves permanently to a rock by their heads. When the tide goes out, they close up until the sea comes back in. As the tide turns, this rubbery-looking creature is also waiting patiently for the sea to come back in, so as to open out and uncurl its 200-odd tentacles. The sea anemone is not, as its name might suggest, a plant, but an animal. It's closely related to jellyfish and has a similar anatomy, a digestive orifice fringed with elegant tentacles. But make no mistake, pretty as it may look, the sea anemone is a ruthless killer, as the shrimp is about to find out. All these creatures have adjusted to the movements of the tides by evolving strategies to avoid drying out. It was developments like these that first enabled organisms to live out of water. One such sea creature is unusual in being a vertebrate, like us. Today, the blenny is one of the few fish that can still survive out of water. Our earliest ancestors were probably fish much like the blenny, which flapped out of the water and embarked on a terrestrial existence 400 million years ago. The gray seal has traveled in the opposite direction. After adjusting to life on land, it went back to living in the water, opting for flippers instead of paws. the storm rages above, the waters rage below. The seaweed dances in the swell of the rising tide. Some is torn off by the strength of the currents and washes up on the beach. The sea leaves a trail of debris along the tideline. At low tide, this small seabird rummages through it, turning over the pebbles and seaweed as it looks for food. Hence its name, turnstone. The tideline is an ecosystem in itself. There are some flies and crustaceans that live exclusively on what they find here. They eat decomposing matter, recycling the detritus of the sea and helping keep the shore clean. For the herring gull, the tideline is a self-serve buffet, a marine junkyard, a shell exhibition, and a lucky dip. It's easy to see why Linnaeus called the green crab Carcinus Linnaeus, the mad crab. Even a much bigger predator may prefer not to tangle with its waving pinchers. The gull doesn't linger. He's seen a dead crab that will be much less trouble. The clifftop gull colony is a hive of activity. Feeding a growing family of chicks is a full-time job. The red spot on the adult bird's beak is a target for the young birds. The chicks tap it to make the parent bird open its beak and regurgitate the food they've been waiting for. The older chicks are already exercising their wings, testing them out in preparation for their maiden flight. There's a constant toing and froing as the adult birds fly back and forth between the cliff and the ocean, getting food for themselves and their young. When a fulmar comes home, it has to observe the welcome ritual or risk a scolding, even from its own offspring. Razorbills do not make nests. This one has laid her eggs directly on the stony ground. No one can say that razorbills are brought up soft. A few yards further up, the kittiwakes are patching up their nest with mud and their own droppings. A kittiwake's notion of interior decoration. The chick clings to the rock face inches from the precipice, all through its growing period. The one thing it must not do is fall. Not easy when lunch is a large wriggling fish. Not far from the kittiwakes are the guillemot family. When the young feel threatened, they shelter under a parent bird's wing. But a guillemot's wing is a meager shelter. There is more to the seabird metropolis than bare rock. The bird's droppings provide fertilizer for a wealth of plant life. In summer, the cliff balconies bloom gaily with the flowers that have grown in the guano. The maritime flowers that grow in the short grass of the cliff-top slopes have to be tough enough to withstand strong salt breezes. They can cling fast even to the sheerest slopes, anchored firmly by their roots. From top to bottom, the cliffs are a riot of color. Meanwhile, the gannet population has exploded. Despite the apparent chaos, each bird knows just where to find its nest and its young. Quarrels often break out between neighbors. For birds, if you come within reach of a beak or a wing, you're too close. This young bird finds out the hard way. Unlike gulls, gannets do not regurgitate their food. Instead, the young help themselves straight from the parent bird's mouth. Gannet chicks sometimes look pretty weird, as their plumage goes through different stages. When they hatch out, they are dark and featherless. Then 2 weeks later, they grow a fluffy white down. As they get older, their plumage darkens, so they end up gray. But they only get their full adult plumage when they are 4 years old. The shag chicks have grown too. They will soon be ready to make their maiden flight. Since life began, nature has experimented with countless forms and processes. Some of those primeval miracles continue to take place at the bottom of the cliffs. A mysterious capsule has been set down in the seaweed. It's the outer casing of a dogfish egg. Inside is the wriggling embryo of a tiny shark, still attached to its food reserve. Small crustaceans nibble at the egg case, helping the baby dogfish to free itself. At the end of its 7-month incubation, the young dogfish is fully formed. It struggles out of its cradle and sets off on the great adventure of life, armed only with its instinct. Off the coast, another much more impressive shark swims into view. This is the basking shark, one of the biggest fishes in the world. A human being could fit in its gaping mouth. But this prehistoric-looking monster is a filter feeder. It lives on plankton. These Atlantic coastal waters are teeming with prehistoric creatures, some gigantic, some minute. To this day, the ocean pulsates with the life forms from which we are descended. The whole history of life unfolds before us in the shelter of the Atlantic cliffs.